Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Ms. Roney Reads. Today I'm going to read for you the first couple of chapters of The Yield by Tara June Winch. This book comes highly recommended by Mrs. Lee. She read it for her book club and was so in love with it, she's bought a whole class set for our school. So that's very exciting, isn't it? Let's read the blurb and see if you're keen to read. The yield in English is the reaping, the things that man can take from the land. In the language of the Wiradjuri, the yield is the things you give to, the movement, the space between things. Banyana. Knowing that he will soon die, Albert Poppy Gondawindi takes pen to paper. His life has been spent on the banks of the Murrumbee River at Prosperous House on Massacre Plains. Albert is determined to pass on the language of his people and everything that was ever remembered. He finds the words on the wind. August Gondawindi has been living on the other side of the world for 10 years when she learns of her grandfather's death. She returns home for his burial, racked with grief and burdened with all she tried to leave behind. Her homecoming is bittersweet as she confronts the love of her kin and news that Prosperous is to be repossessed by a mining company. Determined to make amends, she endeavours to save their land, a quest that leads her to the voice of her grandfather and into the past, the stories of her people, the secrets of the river. Profoundly moving and exquisitely written, The Yield is the story of a people and a culture dispossessed. But it is as much a celebration of what was and what endures, and a powerful reclaiming of Indigenous language, storytelling, and identity. Sounds amazing. Let's get going. Chapter 1. I was born on Ngurambang. Can you hear it? Ngurambang. If you say it right, it hits the back of your mouth, and you should taste blood in your words. Every person around should learn the word for country in the old language, the first language, because that is the way to all time, to time travel. You can go all the way back. My daddy was Buddy Gondawindi, and he died a young man by the hands of a bygone disease. My mother was Augustine, and she died an old woman by the grip of, well, it was an old world disease too. Yet nothing ever really dies. Instead, it all goes beneath your feet beside you, part of you. Look there, grass on the side of the road, tree bending in the wind, fish in the river, fish on your plate, fish feeding you. Nothing is ever gone. Soon when I change, I won't be dead. I always memorized John 11:26. Whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Yet life rushed through and past me as it will for each person. Before I believed everything they taught me, I thought when all were dead that all were gone. And so as a young fella, I tried to find my place in this short life. I only wanted to decide for myself how I'd live it, but that was a big ask in a country that had a plan for me, already mapped in my veins since before I was born. The one thing I thought I could control was my own head. It seemed the most sensible thing to do was to learn to read well. So in a country where we weren't really allowed to be, I decided to be, to get water from the stones. You see? After I met my beautiful wife, although beauty was the least of her, strong and fearless was the most of her, well, she taught me lots of things, big things. Best thing she taught me was to learn to write the words too. Taught me I wasn't just a second-rate man raised on white flour and Christianity. It was my wife, Elsie, who bought me the first dictionary. I think she knew she was planting a seed, germinating something inside me when she did that. What a companion the dictionary is. There are stories in that book that'll knock your boots off. To this day, it remains my prized possession, and I wouldn't trade it for all the tea in China. The dictionary from Elsie is why I'm writing it down. It was my introduction to the idea of recording, written just like the Reverend once wrote the births and baptisms at the mission, like the station manager wrote rations at the station, and just like the mams and masters wrote our good behaviour at the boys' home, a list of words any fool can look up and be told the meaning. A dictionary, even if this language isn't mine alone, even if it's something we grow into and then living long enough shrink away from. I am writing because the spirits are urging me to remember, and because the town needs to know that I remember. They need to know now more than ever before. To begin, but there are too many beginnings for us Gondawindi. That's what we were bestowed and cursed with by the same shifty magic, an eternal once upon a time. The story goes that the church brought time to us, and the church, if you let it, will take it away. I'm writing about the other time, though, deep time. This is a big, big story. The big stuff goes forever. Time ropes and loops and is never straight. That's the real story of time. The problem now facing my own once upon a time is that Dr. Shah from the High Street Surgery has recently given me a filthy bill of health. Cancer of the pancreas, which is me done and dusted. So, because they say it is urgent, because I've got the church time against me, I'm taking pen to paper to pass on everything that was ever remembered. All the words I found on the wind. Chapter 2. By the river is where Albert Gondawindi had wandered up to Prosperous as a little boy, wonder-faced, bare-skinned, from the canvas shelter of Tent Town to the tin of the mission, along with his mother and his little sister inside her. Albert would remember how they walked or marched, that there were police officers on horses to show them the way past the Red River, stained by tea tree and other things. Many years later, on the day of his death, Albert wondered once again how it must have been for the old people out by Murrumby when it flowed, a time when the air was clean as the time before the words clean and dirty had ever been imagined. The river would have been clear 20 feet down, and the earth hummed its own reverent tune, day in and day out, until one day. How quickly things change, he thought. In his final hours, Albert sat looking the same way all the remaining Gondawindi would soon gather and look. Ahead of him on the fold-out table was the almost finished dictionary, beyond the table all the world. He suddenly felt a great wind blow from the Murrumby and instinctively slapped his hand atop the pile, protecting the words. In the distance he could have sworn he saw a gang of brolgas flying, further afield a swarm of locusts. The sky changed colour, all while the papers flapped against his will. He closed his eyes, wondered if he was about to go elsewhere, and then, as if encouraged by the wind, urged by the ancestors, took his hand away and arced, looking to the heavens to see the pages swirl and blow and eventually disappear into the air. She hung up the phone. Poppy Albert was dead. So far away from the place where boys learnt to kill rabbits and girls learnt to live with the grief. Far away where people were born guilty but couldn't admit it. Where whole years vanished from her. Days spent working thankless jobs or burrowed under a blanket, shunning whole seasons. The decade had aged her like a coin, all the shine gone. In that place on the other side of the world, she woke before the phone rang, made coffee and a tumbler of aspirin. It wasn't only in the mornings that she, August, was trapped between two states, sleep and coming to, yet especially that morning on the cusp of being younger and older. She was about to exit the infinite stretch of her 20s and had nothing to show. At the answering of the phone and the breaking of the news, she felt something dark and three-dimensional fall out of her body. Something as solid as a self. She'd become less, suddenly. She knew she'd felt that exact same way before, though she didn't feel tears coming the way they burn the face and blur the eyes. Her face instead was cold to the touch. Her heart rate lowered, her eyes dry and her arms chicken-skinned and thin as kindling began to start a fire. She took the newspaper from the mail tray, took the crate of wood and knelt in the corner of the common kitchen. She spread the newspaper out, smoothing the pages with the side of her fist, and held the hatchet and the cypress in each hand. Printed in the newspaper was a small photograph of a rhino. Above the picture it read in big ink block letters, "Gone forever. Black rhino extinct." An animal, zip, gone. She could taste what she imagined was rhino skin, a dry, warm thickness, muscle and dirt. She hadn't told anyone about everything. She couldn't bring herself to remember, and not about the things she could taste and smell instead, things that one shouldn't be able to taste and smell. Once, with a stack of textbooks on her lap and knowledge of August's hunger, a friend of hers studying social work at night at school and having not known what it was to experience a terrible inheritance, asked her simply about her school life. August had gone along with the line of inquiry, told her how she only knew she was poor at lunchtime, told her when she lived with her grandparents it was always good food, always leftovers from the night before. She'd been the only student to use the microwaves in the teacher's lounge. Before that, she tried not to tell her that the lunches her mother packed were humiliating. Instead, she said they were just kooky. Kooky? August wound an invisible turbine at her ear. Her friend had nodded, had understood, and closed her eyes in accordance with her training, a serene indication to go on. August had closed her eyes too and briefly let herself remember. One day, a jam sandwich, cut crusts. Next day, something the kids would make fun of, a tin of Christmas gingerbread in July, Easter buns in October. Sometimes a bread roll smeared with something incomplete like ketchup. And a few times I remember opening the lunchbox and there was just imitation play food. A little plastic lamb chop, plastic cast apple with no stem. It was my mother's sense of humour. August hadn't seen the sense of humour when she was a girl, but she had laughed about it then. They both laughed until something broke in August, and she did cry, the last time, but she pretended they were tears of laughter. Afterwards they went to the pub. August didn't tell her any more, not how she was baptised by the sun, and not that as far, far away as she went from her country, from her home, she still couldn't remove the scent and taste of dirt and diesel and flesh and muddied water from that grey hemisphere of her mind. How the worst thing that could ever happen had already happened. Time's up. The rhino in the news reminded August that she'd never been to the zoo, never seen a rhino in real time. It might as well have been a dinosaur. The paper listed other recent extinctions, and just like that, she thought, zip, gone. Poppy, Albert Gondawindi, was extinct. No more Albert Gondawindi roamed the earth, and no more black rhino either. With an armful of sticks she fed the iron stove, close enough to redden her face in the eager first flames. Poppy Albert used to say that the land needed to burn more, a wild and contained fire, a contradiction of nature. He was talking about a different land, though, not the one August had known for over a decade, in the grasslands forever wet, foreign forests of elm, ash, sycamore, hazel, and in the white willows that dipped into quiet canals, where smaller birds in secondary colours flocked together and fires never licked, where the sky fit into the reflection of a stone well, full with rainwater, where low morning clouds played sleight of hand and day never quite arrived before night. She knew that she had once known the beloved land where the sun slapped the barren earth with an open palm, and knew too that she would return for the funeral, go back full with shame for having left, catch the disappointment in the turned mouths, go back and try to find all the things that she couldn't find so many thousands of kilometres away. August found a replacement for her dishwashing shifts, packed the one bag she owned, and before boarding switched off her phone forever. During the flight, she watched the GPS on the headset, the numbers rising and steadying, the plane skittering over the cartoon sea. At the other end, having reached a certain altitude, crossed the timelines, descended into new coordinates, she'd hoped it would be enough to erase the voyage. Erase the facts of the matter, erase the burial rites to be recited, erase all the erasures of them, and that fractured family they once were. Just as they'd been for a century, godless and government-housed and spread all over the place. And then August wondered if there was enough remembering to erase. During the flight, she dreamt of Poppy Albert. He was featureless in the dream, but she knew it was him. They'd arrived in the middle of the conversation. She didn't know how they'd arrived there, in the field. He was telling her that there was a lot of remembering to the past, to having stories, to knowing your history, your childhood, but there is something to forgetting it too. At the beginning of the dream, but as if at the end of a long conversation, he'd taken her hand and said that there exists a sort of torture of memory if you let it come. if you invite the past to huddle beside you, comforting like a leech. He was telling her more, that a footprint in history has 1,000 repercussions, that there are 1,000 battles being fought every day because people couldn't forget something that happened before they were born. There are a few worse things than memory, yet few things better, he'd said. Be careful. That brings us to the end of the chapter. I hope you enjoyed this introduction to The Yield by Tara June Winch. This book has won some pretty impressive awards, so I hope you enjoy it. Please let me know if you'd like to borrow a copy, and we'll organise to get it sent to you. Thanks very much for listening. See you next time.